Hi, everybody, and welcome to our June Confidentially Speaking webinar. For those of you who are joining our webinar series for the first time, my name is Elise Margow, founder and CEO of Confidentially Speaking, the home of negotiation. Before we dive into today's webinar topic, in the spirit of conciliation, I acknowledge that I'm speaking on the land of the Bunwurrung and Wurundjeri peoples of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, and also extend that respect to elders of any other communities and cultures present. Our topic for discussion today is who's changing whom? Whether it be through New Year's resolutions or any other means of self-reflection, many of us often identify that we need to effect change in our lives, be this in doing more exercise, changing our eating routines, or indeed changing our entire way of life. In our professional and business worlds, we perennially talk about long-term business strategies and the changes needed to effect these. Today, we are going to explore how to effectively negotiate your way through business and self-transformation. And there is no finer person to navigate this exploration than change management advisor extraordinaire, Lynda Brest, who is joining us from London. Wow, our first international webinar. This is very exciting. Lynda, welcome to Confidentially Speaking webinar. And for those of you who have not met Lynda or worked with her before, Lynda has worked for many years internationally and in Australia, advising and supporting leaders and their people to successfully navigate complex business transformation. She combines her skills in creative problem solving, human-centered design, and facilitation to collaborate with her clients in changing their operating models, organizational cultures and capabilities, leadership skills, workplace practices, and talent management strategies. That is amazing, Lynda. I feel very honored to have someone with your depth of experience working with us today. So welcome to you. And thank you so much for waking up so early in the morning, London time, to share your expertise.
It's my absolute pleasure, Elise. Thank you for having me.
Great. So for those, we see this really amazing resume. You've done phenomenal things in the area of change management. But what do you do when you're not changing companies and cultures?
What am I doing? I think actually life is a journey of change. So at the moment, I'm a fledgling golfer. I'm a fledgling bridge player. I also do some pro bono philanthropic work. So I chair a board of a non-for-profit organization that does work that's very close to my heart. And I keep myself busy. So between client work, philanthropic work, and some of my hobbies, of course, I have a family, I have a husband, and some children and grandchildren. So I'm very blessed and I keep my life very busy. Always something new to think about and do. Yeah.
And do you get any sleep given all that you do?
Well, it depends. If I'm joining a webinar from London at 3 a.m, probably not as much. But, actually, the sleep issue and the time management issue is probably one of those things that's most critical to think about when you're going through any change processes. How do you put self-care and managing yourself into that frame, and time management and being kind to yourself and kind to others in terms of the time demands is probably one of the things you have to be most conscious of. That's a good question.
Yeah. So thank you for being sleep deprived on our behalf and starting from the beginning, change is, as you said, it happens all the time. We have to live with it and guide ourselves through it. But can you give us an example of if I identify a change in life, whether it's self change or business change, it seems almost impossible to navigate, and we get a bit scared. So how do we work our way through that?
I think I always think about things in threes. And from a change point of view, change, along with uncertainty, there are certain things that one can predict. And the three areas that I always focus on that I think that are a helpful starting point, and we came up with this title of Who's Changing Whom, is because regardless of the catalyst for change, and regardless of whether change is initiated by you or your organization or is imposed on you and your organization, I think it's helpful to think about three things. What is your change journey that you're going to go through, and how do you manage yourself? Who are the other people that are going to be on this journey with you, and how do you need to understand them and take them along on the journey? And finally, what's a sort of roadmap or a landscape for your journey that you need to architect and think purposefully about as you go? So managing yourself, managing others, and managing the journey are the three touchstones that I always think about, whether I'm going through something personally or I'm helping a client and working with an organization to navigate a change that the organization might be going through or a part of the organization might be going through.
Wow, and that's really insightful. So starting with managing yourself, can you give us examples of how we would go about doing that?
Sure. Think on this, there's so many different frameworks in terms of managing yourself. But the one that I find is often really resonates is a model from a gentleman called William Bridges, who talks about transitions and talks about thinking about, once again, thinking of the magic number three sort of phases that you will go through individually in any change. Firstly, there's the sort of phase of letting go. Thinking about all the things that you're going to have to trade off or give up potentially in a change that you're going through. And how do you consciously identify and acknowledge and start letting go of those aspects of the way things are done today that are going to have to change if you're going to adopt a new way of being or a new way of working. The second phase in that journey is the limbo phase, where you might be testing things and trying things. You have a lot of uncertainty, which you mentioned earlier. You might have some hesitance. You might start discovering all these things that you thought were going to be all wonderful and useful are not so easy to adopt and to adjust to. So there's this limbo period where you're trying and testing, but you're not so sure that this is really going to work for you. And then finally, there's the period where you sort of start adopting and adapting. You start sensing that things are moving. You start seeing that some of the risks that you thought you might be taking are not that profound. You start seeing the benefits and enjoying some of the outcomes of new ways of doing things that you might not have anticipated before. And so you go through that stage of letting go, testing and learning and being in that limbo period, and then actually adopting and adapting to new ways of working, and then it becomes second nature. So you're not actually thinking about that too closely anymore. And recognizing that you will go through these three phases and they may iterate. You may get the hang of something and then realize it opens up a new area that you hadn't thought about and that now needs some consideration. And I'll give you just a practical example or a personal example. Learning how to play golf. Giving yourself permission to fail, to try to hit a shot, to give it your best swing, and then to see that the ball is still on the tee in the grass and nothing went in the direction that you were expecting it to go in. Adjusting your stand, learning to stand and flex your muscles in a completely different way, and getting comfortable with getting things wrong before you can get them right. How many times do you have to take a swing at a ball before it's actually going in the direction that you wanted to go in? What's your practice regime? What works for you? Do you need to go in the morning? Do you need to go 5 times a week? How often do you need to play with someone else? Do you need some coaching? What is it that you do in that in-between as you're starting to hit your stride and really learn how to play the game? And then as you start playing more often, and as you start playing with different partners, and as you might go to a more complex or difficult course, how do you make sure that you don't give up, that you keep at it, that you get the enjoyment and the fun out of it? That's really important. And once you start getting that, how do you bottle that feeling and remember those happy moments so that when you go down into a bit of a dip of not being able to hit the ball quite as well as you did the last 5 games you played, you can hold on to the feeling that will come and the confidence, and that you'll persist and move through it. And some of us have a more positive and optimistic way of looking at the world than others. So recognizing that in yourself and knowing how long it may take you to let go of something, how long you may need to test and try, and what you need to hold on to as your touchstones of success so that you can get yourself into the adoption stage. That's all part of managing yourself as well, knowing yourself, knowing how you go through those phases, and recognizing how to support yourself and maintain your resilience through that change process. And once you have that consciousness about yourself and your own journey, it will make you a lot more competent and confident in being able to recognize those same phases in others and to help them go through that journey. So there's really a crossover between how you manage yourself and how that then enables you to manage others. And if you focus only on the externals and on the others, and you don't think about yourself, you will sometimes get caught up in the change process that you're going through and not be able to see beyond that to help other people that you try to influence.
So really great advice there as to managing yourself and working and being honest about yourself. Just because your friend went out and learned to play golf in 10 lessons and is, whooping around the golf course doesn't mean that you're incapable of learning just because it takes you about 30 tries to get off a pitch. And I guess the question I have there is, firstly, let's talk about when do I say, well, I've done all this, and I'm still not getting the joy? I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but looking at myself when I'm going through this process, I'm realizing I've got to give something up. I've got to try. I've got to accept that there's going to be failure. Change. What we always say, you actually learn more when you fail than when you're successful. So I've got to expect the failure. I've got to put my resilience ready for the failure. But sometimes, even though we try that so hard, it might not be meant to be. Maybe no matter how many times I swing a golf club, I'm never going to get off I'm never going to get
the tee,
past the tee. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe it's time to try long distance walking rather than golf, depending on what your objective was. So that's a very important question you're asking, Elise, because from the get-go of any change process, one of the things as well about understanding yourself and others is why you're doing this. What is the purpose? What is the burning platform we often talk about? That's really the catalyst for making the change. And what will success look like? And understanding what's important to you, what some of your non-negotiables are, but why you're doing it and what you're expecting and at times having to get out of it is actually a very important early step, so that you have that true north in mind. You know what your purpose is, you know what your objective is, and you can use your experience to validate whether or not it's what you're doing is moving you towards it. And it might very well be. And there might, I think about a very personal example of something like marriage. It might very well be that you go into a situation with a certain intent. And we know that some relationships last a lifetime and some relationships don't. Sometimes your objectives, your intentions become misaligned. And understanding what your purpose is, what success looks like for you, what your non-negotiables are, and checking in from time to time to ensure that that's what you're achieving is a very, very important part of a change process. And sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes with the best of intentions and with that clarity of purpose, there are times when you have to step back and reflect and realize that that's not what's being achieved. And then you have the choice to continue or the choice to course correct and try your change in another way, or the choice to actually step off and say, this isn't the change that we needed or that we anticipated or that is going to have the benefit, and rather call it sooner than later and move on. And of course, we see that in many business situations where changes might be initiated and then might be closed out or closed down if they're not achieving the objective. But having that objective in mind up front and knowing what success looks like and knowing how you're going to check in around that success is actually also a huge part of the journey management that we'll talk about in a minute.
Great. So We looked at ourselves, and I think it's very important that, and I guess with any negotiation, that we need to know what our objective is, because negotiating for negotiation's sake or change management for change management's sake is a recipe for disaster. So
absolutely.
we talked you really well about us getting ourselves ready for change, whether it's personally with business. But then you talked about the next step is influencing others. And that I think might be a little bit more difficult because, well, in most cases, because we can control ourselves, but it's not always as easy to control others. So can you help us work our way through trying to change manage other people?
So, as we said earlier, who's changing whom, really understanding who the others are and how you categorize them into more important and less important for your focus in terms of managing others is really quite an important set of thinking that you need to do at the beginning of a change journey. And I use a 2x2 matrix. Being a good consultant, everybody has a 2x2 matrix. So we're going from the rule of 3 to the rule of 2x2. And what I found over the years has always been really important and resonates with the situation is to think about the matrix on 2 dimensions. Who can have an influence on the change? And to what extent are people impacted by the change? So the matrix is a continuum of influence. You can almost think about it, if I do this just to illustrate, like a 2x2 on a 4-chart framework on a page. Your influence goes from high to low, and and let's say that that's the x-axis, and your impact from high to low is the y-axis. So you have 4 options. You have people that have a high impact on the change. That will be highly impacted by the change and can highly influence its success. So they will be in the sort of very important quadrant, the high quadrant. Then you might have people who aren't that impacted by the change, but might have a high influence on its progress and success. They are also very important to understand and involve. You might have people that aren't very impacted and don't have much influence, and they'll be folks that you might engage with from time to time in a very sort of low energy and low activity way. And then I've got a 4th quadrant, and I have to remember which one I haven't said. You'll have people that will be low, that will have low influence on the change, but might be highly impacted by it. And they will be the people that are really the subject of the change. And what's important about these 2 quadrants is to think about which individuals or groups will fall into one of these 4 areas and how you engage them in the change process. So let me give you a practical example. When you think about people that might have a high influence on your success and might be highly impacted as well, those are the people that you want to have as key decision makers. You might want to have representatives from those groups, for example, on a change board or an advisory group. And certainly they need to be helping you make decisions that might be important through a negotiation process. So very often when I'm setting up change projects, representatives from those groups or individuals that you would categorize that way will be on the steering committee, they'll be on the advisory board, and they will be approving budgets. And they might be, when you've got 2 different sets of decisions and you're having to make trade-offs, they will be making those trade-offs with you. Does that make sense? Is that resonating?
Yeah.
And then you will have people that you let me use a corporate example. When you are changing a benefit scheme for your staff or your workforce, the actual workforce that are going to be affected by that benefit scheme will be highly impacted. They might not have as much influence on the success. If you're making the change for regulatory reasons, for example, people that you want to have on your advisory board might be experts in that regulatory area who are going to give you advice and are going to make sure that what you're doing is compliant. But your staff, who have to adapt and adopt a new way a new policy or a new regulatory framework need to be very well informed. They need to know what their rights are. You want to make sure that they've got all the information and the insight so that you don't have an industrial dispute, for example, or you don't trigger some unintended consequences from implementing a change in your policies and practices. So that impacted workforce may not influence whether or not you go ahead, but need to understand, because if they don't understand and they aren't properly engaged, they can slow you down and they can actually be a hindrance. Now, you might have the general public who are customers of your organization, or are existing or potential customers of your organization. And if you don't handle your dispute or your regulatory change effectively, they may hear of it through the newspapers. It might have a negative impact on your brand or your reputation. So you might be putting information out into social media or thinking about ways to engage with your customers through customer information channels that will be filtered and not necessarily a huge focus for you, but that will be enabling you to get to audiences who we would classify as low impact, low influence audiences, but that still need to be kept in the loop. And then finally, you have groups that might be have a high influence on the change, but aren't that impacted by it. These could be social influences, depending on your type of business. There could be special interest groups, depending on your sector. It could be the government or some regulatory policymakers themselves, who you need to make sure you're staying close to. You need to make sure you're getting advice from. You need to make sure that they won't raise an alarm or raise a flag as you're getting to the end of your journey and bring you to a halt, because they haven't been kept in the loop and they can influence the success of your strategy. So really, I'm sorry, I know that's a very quick walk around a 2x2 matrix, but really understanding who's important. And this is where the whom comes in. Who do I need to make sure that I'm spending a lot of time with, and who do I need to make sure I'm meeting with, for example, on a regular basis, regularly engaging with, giving decision-making authority to, and prioritizing as an audience for communication and engagement so that they come with me on the journey. Who can I pay slightly less attention to, but nonetheless not lose sight of, because they're going to also be impacted by the change? And how do I design communication and engagement activities so that all these different groups are taken care of in the best possible way to achieve our objectives? It's a very, very important way of thinking about the whom and how those different stakeholders then are incorporated into your plan for the change that you're orchestrating.
It sounds so, it sounds so logical, but it also sounds incredibly complex, for someone who isn't used to this kind of thinking and working between the prioritizing and getting the communication straight. Can you give us, I don't know if it's a simpler example, but an example of how that we could carry forward to perhaps visualize how this would work?
Yes. That's a great question. So let's go back to my marriage example.
Yeah.
When you're first dating, when you first meet somebody who's going to be your life partner, who do you think of as the important people? Now, obviously, depending on your age and stage in life. I'll give you my personal example. I met my partner, my husband, very late in life. So by the time I met him, he had his family, he had his parents, his siblings, his friends, but he had children and grandchildren. So here you have a whole different array of people that are part of this emerging relationship that for me was a life-changing relationship. Who do you pay attention to? Whose opinion is going to have the most sway? Who might it be that might meet you and have a few question marks around your suitability? In my case, I have never been married before. I'm contemplating a relationship with someone who's got children and grandchildren. So there were some skeptics saying to him, what does she know about having a family? How's she going to prioritize your children and your grandchildren? How's she going to expect them to fit into your life? So understanding who those people are, getting to know them, making sure that they can get to know me Now, I'm not going to pretend I was that self-serving about it, but there's an example where we all know that in relationships where you think it's just about you and the person you're dealing with, there's a whole lot of people standing behind them, and there's a whole lot of people that are important to them and will have an impact on whether or not your relationship can succeed. And understanding them, understanding how you need to relate to them, understanding what they may want to know about you. Spending time. I spend time, and I'm very thankful that I have the opportunity to spend time with the grandchildren one-on-one, and forming my own relationships with the grandchildren, forming relationships with their other grandparents who are not part of my nuclear family, but are part of their nuclear family, making it easy for the children in this case, because for my husband, it wasn't his first marriage, making it easy that the children didn't feel, and the grandchildren, that they need to choose between one spouse and another, or between one grandmother and another, making them equally comfortable. That was very important to me. I was very fortunate that I'm in a situation where we're all a lot older, so there isn't necessarily a challenging family dynamic, but I know many situations where there are challenging family dynamics. It's not always that easy to navigate and to have everybody comfortable when someone new comes into a family. But certainly just acknowledging and recognizing all the different players, who are the long-standing friends that live overseas that are going to rock up after a few months and have never met you and maybe disrupt the relationship because they're there now and they've got their needs, and you've got to accommodate them, and you've got to allow your partner to embrace them and make time for them that might take away from time for you. These are some of the day-to-day challenges I think we always find in any meaningful relationship, is how do you find time for each other, and how do you allow all the other people into that space that need some time and whose needs change over time. So you talked right at the very beginning about change is not necessarily always this discrete before, during, and after event. It then morphs into something else, and you've always got to have your knees bent and be ready to adapt. But anyway, I hope that my example of that marriage scenario or a relationship scenario is helpful to sort of think practically around the most important players, the lesser important players. But I think even if they all have their different role, how you have to think about each person or player and what's important to them, so that you can take them on the journey that you want to achieve, towards the outcome that you're hoping to realize.
I love that you gave a personal example in that case, because I think many times we categorize business change and we think, well, I've got to deal with the managers and the directors and the customers and the press and potentially regulators, but it all boils down to a relationship, right? And and how we affect our relationships. And it doesn't matter if we're talking to the CEO of a company, or we're talking to our spouse or our brothers or sisters, or it still boils down to personalities and dealing with relationships, but we just adapt to where we are. So I think that's a great example to bring it down to real terms. Yeah. And so so we've dealt with those impacted. What do we do with that person who is dragging their feet and doesn't want to come along with us? So we've been kind. We've taken them for a coffee. We thought about how to persuade them, as I always say, persuade them in a way that makes them want to come along on the journey, as opposed to what you want of them. And but there's always those people who are negative and they don't really want to, they're either resistant to change or they just can't see it, and they start causing problems. How do I deal with those people?
So there's a few different, I guess, strategies, tactics, call them what you will, that I often talk about. Firstly, if you are setting up, and I'll use a business situation if you don't mind, but we talk about the coalition of the willing. John Carter uses this example very often. And sometimes you have the coalition of the unwilling too, and identifying where you might get those pockets of resistance and making sure that those people are in your areas of challenge and resistance might be early on. That's very important. So having the voice of reason and the voice of excitement and the voice of skepticism as part of the conversation as you design your change is always very important. Having said that, they don't need to be sold. They're your early cheerleaders, and you want to have them out front waving the flags and saying how fantastic it is. You've got 60% of the people who will sit on the fence, who, have to be talked to, cajoled, and will gradually go along. And then you've got 20% of the people that just won't come. And for those people that just won't come, getting their input, getting their advice early on, very important. But then finding them channels and finding them ways to opt out becomes another focus, so that you can give them an easy way. And when I say easy, a way to extract themselves and to self-eject that is as less, is we as least disruptive as possible, but recognizing that some people will resist, will always resist. And depending on the context, and of course it's very context dependent, depending on the context, they may be a child that you just don't get on with. And they're always going to be there. They're always going to be part of the relationship. And then it's up to you to decide how you're going to adapt your way of addressing that challenge and that resistance, because it's going to be there for the duration. But there might be other people who genuinely need an exit plan, a package, to be packaged out of a situation, to be moved into a different role or a different department or a different area where that's better suited to their skills and better suited to their temperament and better suited to their mindset. So that is sometimes a consequence or an inevitable outcome for the 20% that just don't want to play. They just don't agree with the change, and they are going to resist it as vociferously and continually as they can.
Yeah, so to the extent that you can control it, kind of after you've done your best to persuade them to the change, if they are still going to be negative, some of them you can either get them to self-eject or help them to eject them from
an alternative path. Yeah.
I love the way you say that.
Sometimes some of that, some of that resistance actually gives you a more creative, gives you some creative input into designing something that is more palatable. So resistance is not always a bad thing. Resistance is not always something that has to be quashed or steered away. I think it's very important to realize early on that very often resistance is just ignorance. It's not understanding, and it's fear of the unknown. It's not a genuine objection or a bloody-minded attitude towards a change. It's truly not understanding and just a natural instinct to like the status quo, to want to hold on to what I've got. And that's why, I'm sorry, Elise, I go back to that model that we were talking about right at the very beginning, that we don't always recognize what we have to let go of either.
Yes.
We don't always know. And as you get more information, you realize it, and that's sometimes when resistance kicks in. It's the fear of the unknown.
And I think it's also good for the person wanting to affect the change to listen, because sometimes I know I'm that person as well, get so excited that a change is in the air and I'm thinking, oh, this is a magnificent. And then if I don't have enough skeptics or people questioning it, I actually miss a whole lot, and it's ineffective. It's what I think is great isn't really that great. And if I'd had the skeptics in the room and I'd listened to the skeptics in the room, I would have actually thought carefully, as you say, redesign, rethink, and maybe even given up that this isn't going to work. It's irrational. It's just me being a happy changer,
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So that's
and change for change's sake, and actually you make me think of another thing that's often overlooked, which is the importance at times when people are feeling unsafe or anxious and uncertain, the importance of anonymity and allowing people a space to raise questions, to put ideas forward without having to name themselves or identify themselves in the process, because it can really help you as well to manage your own unconscious bias, because we all have biases. And in any change, to your point, when you're so enthusiastic or it's something you've got to get done, you might temper your openness to feedback depending on who is giving it to you. So really remembering that when you want to have two-way dialogue, sometimes it has to be a dialogue where it doesn't matter who said it. It's a question of what the themes are, what the trends are. Are you starting to see a pattern in your feedback, regardless of who it's from, that is telling you that you need to step back and maybe think about some of your design ideas or your change ideas a little more carefully. The other thing too is to always think about your change in the smallest bite-sized chunks possible, and to do what's the minimum that you need to change that's going to start creating an impact, a positive impact that can get people comfortable with a new way of working and with a step towards the final outcome. Because those proof points, those early wins, those early benefits can really help people, can catalyze people's openness to the bigger changes yet to come. So I'm getting into managing the journey now, but I think sometimes those proof points as well, in and of themselves, can help skeptics and naysayers get a little more comfortable. And then a small change early can make a huge change later a lot more easy to achieve.
I think it's a great time actually for us to move to the journey. And so give me an example of where we would go from a small change, which is important, to get everybody enthused to start coming on the journey.
Right. So if I go back to my personal example, if I can use that.
Yeah, please.
You might be with me and my husband, starting to show up more often at family events, not just being invited for the big things, but coming for an afternoon tea or coming for a walk at the beach or being part of the lift scheme when the grandchildren need to be picked up from school, and just being a presence that's just there more often. Might be some of those early ways to get to know someone and get to know the family without all the pressure of being a permanent fixture. But then over time, getting more embedded into, if my husband was being invited somewhere, there was the expectation that I would be coming as a formal partner, as more than just a presence, but as somebody that was included and adopted into more important family outings, weddings, important celebrations. So I think that's, you start becoming known and familiar, and then you're expected to be there. And then you're making the decisions as to who's being hosted for a family occasion or a religious occasion, and you're actually co-hosting. So the role sort of changes dramatically from just being a casual participant to being an expected attendee to being someone who's actually hosting something that used to be done by, in this case, my husband, he, as the father figure and as the head of the family. It wasn't just his decision anymore, it was our decision. And so just gradually becoming part of how decisions were made in the family, how events were hosted in the family, for me was a pathway to, I don't know if that's a practical example that answers your question, but just to sort of build from a small getting to know you kind of interaction to a more important decision-making role in the family dynamic, which happened over time. Once people were used to me and could see that that I could fit into the family, that sort of earned the right to then start making decisions that might impact how they were all having to do things as well. Probably not the best example, but that's the one that comes to mind.
but it's one that we can all understand, right? But I was thinking maybe if, nowadays with technology and AI going through the roof, I know there's a lot of fear about potential job loss. We don't really understand it. Maybe what we could do from a simple point of view is just start having people over talking about AI. What does it mean? Having conversations about it. Maybe, you know, once a month, people telling is, you know, what's happened in the AI world, so that it starts becoming part of the conversation before we actually start implementing very serious AI change into an organization. Because I mean, that is one that everybody fears. Well,
that's true.
You know, so maybe, but you know, if we can understand it better when we take it to the personal always, I think. That's good. So when we're going on this journey, so we take bite sizes. What else do we need to think about?
So I think for me, there's a rule of 4 with as you think about your roadmap. And I think I do think about it as a roadmap for change. And I think about 4 sort of key swim lanes of activity, if I can use that word. So certainly the phasing, what are the bite-sized chunks in the journey? How do you go from right from the get-go, actually thinking about how long should something take and what are the key phases in that journey is very important. Are you looking at something that should take weeks, that should take months, that could take years, and how do you break it down to bite-sized chunks? So the sort of phasing and the sequencing. And if you think about a roadmap, you know, what are the towns that you're going to go through? Where are you going to take your rest stops? Where are you going to have your reflection points? Where you're going to get out and stretch? Where you're going to need to get some nutrition because you've got to keep yourself energized? I mean, really thinking about it as a map of a journey is what that sort of phasing is, and the stage, what I call the staging. And then when you go back to all those different communities and those different groups that you need to engage, there's the leadership journey in terms of how you think about key leaders, key decision makers that you're going to take along, and how you equip them and support them to be ready for those roles that they've got to play through the change process. And then what about everybody else, those different types of stakeholders who are influenced and impacted? And what's the sort of pattern of and program of communication and engagement activity that you're going to do with them? Those are some other phases, thinking about your leaders, thinking about all the other impacted stakeholders and how you're going to take them on the journey, are 2 other areas of focus. And then finally, what are your measures of success? So what is good going to look like at every phase? How will you know you've got there? What are you going to use to do your measurement? Are you going to be doing employee opinion surveys? Are you going to be doing quick pulse checks with a random selection of people who are exposed to the change? Are you going to go out to your customers and to people in the general community and ask them what they've heard and whether they think it's a good idea and what their feedback is? So understanding what success looks like, how you're going to track your success, and when you're going to do that so that you're continually delivering benefits is another area of focus. So, you know, it's about thinking about the phases, building the leadership support, building the followership through your people that are impacted more generally, and understanding what success looks like and how you're going to measure that and manage the pace of change. That really helps you to set out a roadmap with those key sort of areas of activity. Obviously, there's the change you're designing at the back of all of that, the actual things that need to change themselves, but they will be included in those different phases.
Don't forget the change. And here, just a reminder to everyone, if you have a question to ask Lynda, I'm getting all the wonders of being able to ask questions, but if you've got a question to ask Lynda, please feel free to put your question in the chat and I'll get Lynda. As I said that, something came up, Lynda, so I think I'm going to mention. So yes, please feel free to continue asking questions, but a question came in the chat. What steps should a person consider if long in a career and considering a change of direction? That's huge.
So, you know, well, let's bring it back to the three key areas, I guess. If you're considering a change in direction, if I think about first managing yourself, what's making you want to change in direction? What's important to you? Why are you looking for something different? I would ask myself, and I often do this with clients as well. What changes have you made in the past from a career or career direction point of view? What worked well? Where did you find the change was easy? Where were you challenged? And how do you take that insight about yourself and other change journeys into this new consideration about a change in direction? I would think about some of those things. What are your non-negotiables? Do you have to earn at a certain level? Do you need to live in a certain place? Do you need to have a certain amount of time for your life outside of your career that you need to protect? I mean, thinking about your non-negotiables and what success looks like for you if you take a change in direction. I think I would think about that. Then when you're thinking about who else is affected, is this a decision, a career change or a change in direction that you need to discuss with your family, with friends, with your current colleagues? Have you got any partners that you're working with on a more professional basis that are going to need to be a part of that decision? Could you work with a career coach? Is there somebody that understands the area that you're interested in moving into that could give you advice on that? That's how you could think about who are all the others that might help me on this journey, that might go on this journey with me. And when I think about managing the change, so managing yourself, managing others, and then managing the change, how quickly do you want to do this? Do you have a time frame for it? Is it something you want to do in 6 months, in 8 months, or in 3 years? And then how do you think about the things you want to understand, the questions you want to answer, the people you want to engage with, and always put it into a bit of a project plan so that you can track how you're going and if you're getting any closer to thinking about that change and making a decision about whether there is a direction that you want to take. You might find that you're gathering information up front and doing a feasibility study, and you realize you could be taking a degree or a certification in something that could take you 5 years, or you could become an apprentice to somebody, go and volunteer somebody, do something for free and get more insight in a few months. So those are all different considerations that might help you frame a time frame for doing something that is part of managing the journey.
Perfect. And another question.
I know that's helpful.
I thought that was very helpful, actually. It wasn't my question, but yes, very helpful. And then another one that's come up, if a CEO wants to change an organization's direction, what are the key preparatory steps, noting a board above and an exec team below? So I think this is before we even start wanting to implement the change. It's actually how do we what are the preparatory steps before we even get to that stage?
That's an interesting one because obviously the CEO's role and responsibilities is contingent on the type of organizational context within which you're working. A board is a great example of one of those stakeholders that is high impact, high influence, because the CEO really has to take the board along for the journey. And I would assume, and I know it does depend on the context of the board, but in this day and age, there are very few boards that don't have regulatory accountability. So as a CEO, understanding how the direction that you want to go in may have consequences for the regulatory environment and accountabilities of your board is very important, so that you know what's important to the board and you understand how you're going to have to explain and flesh out, I guess, your change with the board in terms of their interests, because the board will have very different interests and will have a very different stake in the change than your staff and the folks. I think lower down, I think that was the question, the board and other stakeholders or the workforce.
Yeah, I think it's moving up, and it's like moving. What's I suppose negotiating up and negotiating down.
Actually
really
down, yeah. But ultimately, it comes down to the same. For me, it's the same principles of understanding what the interests are of all those different stakeholders, understanding the impact that they can have on the direction that you're heading in, and obviously, a board can have a power of veto. So, really understanding what you want to do, why you want to do it, how that may support or generate resistance depending on the interests of the board and of your staff, and therefore really understanding that, I think, is part of your preparatory work, so that you can frame the change, get the information you need about the change, and tell the story of the change in a way that's compelling to those different audiences. Ultimately, they need to know how their interests are going to be met. They need to see that you as the CEO have understood what's important to them and are taking care of that. And as well, they're going to want to know how they can help, how they can be involved, how they can help you make the decision. And I think thinking about their involvement is very important as well.
I think that's really a good point, because part of that is, if the more people who take ownership of the change, the easier it is for you to implement it, in the sense, and I don't mean ownership as in accountability necessarily, but actually believe in it and actually want to affect the change in a positive manner. It's really great advice that we try and take as many people on the journey as possible, which is really good. Now, someone called Brad has asked, what's the toughest change management challenge you have ever experienced? That's an interesting one.
That's a
clanger.
Honestly, I have to say this. I think probably the biggest challenge that I've experienced, and I've had a very recent experience of this, is managing myself.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant.
Understanding when, if you're the change, if you're the sort of change architect, or this is a change that you're effecting, and your impact is so important for your success. Understanding yourself when you are reaching a point in a situation that you might find challenging to manage. How do you recognize it in yourself and remove yourself and create some space to get to regroup, maintain a perspective that's helpful for everybody, and really take yourself and your needs out, not possibly at times out of the frame, so that you can focus on the other person's needs, or get external help, so that you are not, if you're in danger of self-sabotage, if I can call it that way, or of losing positive control of the situation, that you know who your people are, that you can go to help you to decompress, to maintain, regroup, and be able to go in and be your best self in difficult situations. And honestly, I think we all know when we're reaching our breaking point. We all know when we maybe not sleeping like we should be, we're feeling particularly grumpy. We're not going to necessarily bring our best self to a situation, and recognizing that, so that you don't let that show up in more contentious and challenging conversations, has probably been one of my biggest and most challenging, where I've had the most challenge. It's where I haven't taken enough notice that that's how I'm feeling, and I haven't stopped myself from going into a situation or continuing in a situation where I know it's likely to become less productive.
It's such good advice, because at the end of the day, change happens around us all the time, and sometimes we have to affect it. Sometimes we are that person who isn't influential, but it could impact us, or it isn't impacting us completely, but in a meaningful day-to-day manner, but it impacts the way we think and about our lifestyles, and what's happening in the world around us, which is quite crazy at the moment anyway. And always coming back to looking at ourselves and saying, well, how do I manage this? And am I coping? And I think
right.
that's so big. It's so big. Such good advice there. Yeah. Now, Lynda, we are getting to the end. I could keep chatting to you forever, although I know you might want to go to bed at some stage. But we're getting to the end of our time here. Is there any last message you'd like to leave everyone around change? A final?
I think what I would say to you is that we know that change is a constant. We know that our brains are forever changing, physically, emotionally, intellectually. We are always in a state of flux. We're always changing. Change is predictable. Change is not always positive, but it is manageable. And I think always having that confidence and always keeping that in mind, even when you're in the valley of despair, as they often talk about with the change curve, even when it feels like you chose this, you initiated this, you did it for all the right reasons, but it's incredibly hard. Just remember that there is a curve. The curve starts going up. That is just a predictable, natural way of being. And really just think about, what do I need to do for myself to manage myself? Who's around me that's part of this change, and how can I help them, and how can they help me? Because it's a two-way street. And what is the journey that I'm really on, and how can I think about it in bite-sized chunks? And how can I really pace it so that it works for me and it works for everybody else? If you really just think about managing myself, managing others, and managing the journey, I think it helps bring some structure, it helps bring some clarity, and those are things that we can all do. And hopefully those three areas of focus will just be helpful as you start thinking about a change this big, a change that's really significant, a change that just impacts you, a change that may impact others. And I just wish everybody luck with the changes that they're going through, because as you said, Elise, we're in a ever-changing world, and just remembering that we can have these tips and tricks to help us, I think sometimes is a comfort in and of itself, just that structure and using some of those rules.
Such great advice to end on, and I'm going to bring that into my life now. I think managing yourself, managing others, and managing the journey, just such great structured advice to help us through what is inevitable, and that is change. So, Lynda, if people want to get in contact with you, can you tell us where they can find you besides London at 3:00 in the morning?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, Elise knows where to find me, but please feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn. My LinkedIn profile is active. You'll have my name. The spelling of both my names is often misspelled. So Lynda with a Y, Brest without an A in it. Those are my two tricks for remembering how to find me. And I look forward to hearing from you via LinkedIn, and to hopefully continue a conversation if you're interested that way.
Thank you so much, Lynda. I really appreciate it. And from our perspective at Confidentially Speaking, just some admin, and that is, we do have our Confidentially Speaking Masterclass taking place on the 9th and 16th July. There are still some places open, so please feel free to go to our website and book. And more exciting, well, no, our masterclasses are very exciting, but excitingly, our next webinar will be on the 27th of August, when we have Tom Andronis, who is the mastermind behind the content engine and storyteller extraordinaire. And we will be discussing how to formulate your narrative to persuade the other side during a negotiation, because part of negotiating is actually storytelling in a way that persuades others. So I'm looking forward to that conversation. Where can you find us? It's www.confidentiallyspeaking.com.au, or on LinkedIn, or on our YouTube channel. So looking forward to continuing the conversation. Again, huge thanks to Lynda Brest, who against all odds woke up very early in the morning to be with us from London. Thank you so much, Lynda. And I know I've gained so much knowledge from you during our conversation, and hope to continue our chat ongoing.
Lovely. Thank you, Elise. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.